name is Claire Burke, and this is my summary video for the Pentadic Criticism paper. So for this paper, the artifact I chose was the photograph, which is entitled Migrant Mother, California, and this was taken by photographer Dorothea Lange, and she was a photographer from Hoboken, New Jersey. And then just for a summary of my artifact and its context. So a summary of the artifact. The photograph was taken in 1936, and the setting of this photo was an encampment for the poor pea pickers during the Great Depression, and specifically right after one of their crops had frozen over. So the stock market crashed in 1929, which led to the Great Depression. So this is during the time of that. And the scene depicts one of the families that are encamping at the pea picking farm, and it captures a mother with her children. And the photograph is of Florence Thompson, who is a mother of 7, and it depicts her with just 2 of her children, and they're facing away from the camera, and she's the focal point of the photo and is looking out into the distance. On her face, you can see the expression of sadness and exhaustion and just kind of weakness that the depression has caused on her. And it kind of depicts that the weight that she's having to carry for her family. And then the mother in the photo is quoted as saying that they were living on frozen vegetables and birds that the children had killed from the field. And you can kind of just see that the wrinkles on the face show a rapid aging because of the depression. Thompson in the photo is only 32, but she looks much older because of the emotions that she's had to carry for her family. And the look that she has on her face is also one of just confusion and hopelessness, kind of an uncertainty too of what to do about her family situation, and it kind of brings about the question of like what hope is left, what else could they do to eat, to get out of their situation. And so that's a little bit about the artifact, and then a summary of the method of criticism and how it was applied to the artifact. So obviously this week's criticism is Pentadic Criticism, and this has the 2 steps and kind of describes, as Kenneth Burke puts it, that life is in much the same way conducted as a play, with the agency, act, agent, scene, and purpose, as well as those 5. And so with those key terms, to do the criticism, you have to first identify what those terms are for your artifact, and then label which one is the most dominant by applying the ratios, as he puts it. So for the application of the method to my photograph, I first found what my 5 terms were, and then I laid those all out, all 20 of them, into a ratio, and decided which one appeared to be the dominant term, and then what effects that had on the motive of the reader and just my overall research question. And for the summary of my findings of my analysis. So the first step of researching both the artist and the artifact was performed before I began, so that I kind of had an understanding of what each of the key terms were. And so in my finding, I found that the agent, it's kind of evident from the photo that the agent in question is the mother, who's the focal point of the photo. Her face is the only one prevalent, and it's facing towards the lens. The act, again, it looks to be of comfort, and it's performed by the mother again, who's looking out and she's comforting her children. The purpose of the act is just to take in and process the emotions that are happening to her and her family. And then the agency being described is one of just sadness and hopelessness. And then finally, the scene is that of poor pea pickers encampment during the height of the Depression. So when analyzing those 5 terms through finding the ratios, I found that the actual dominant term was the scene of the photo. So the field of the pea pickers and the comforting mother is the dominant term. And when you look at this in relation to the others, the agent, so the mother comforting her kids, is not unique to a situation unless you hear the scene, which is that of the depression. And then, so the scene to agent ratio, the scene would be more important. And then for the scene to act ratio, the act of one comforting their kids or surrounding their kids is again normal unless you hear of the scene of the harsh conditions of the Great Depression. And then again, the purpose rests on the scene, since a woman carrying about and processing emotions for her family could be performed in any circumstance. But however, the scene of the Great Depression changes the purpose and reveals what she is in distress about. And then finally, the agency of sadness and hopelessness only makes sense when you look at, again, the scene of the photo within the poverty that they're facing. So it's evident that scene is the dominant term, and Kenneth Burke believes that this reveals the philosophy of materialism. So when an artifact has scene as its main focus, the materialism philosophy is at play in the artifact, and it's the idea where all facts and reality are explainable in terms of matter, motion, or physical laws. So this kind of leads me into the summary of my contribution, or your findings to make the rhetorical theory or everyday life of your audience. So when analyzing this work's contribution to rhetorical theory, a few things became evident. So first, the main finding of the materialistic philosophy in the scene, Lang uses this philosophy to create a picture of the horrors of the Depression. So the philosophy itself highlights the fact that economic forces and hardships are a reality that humans have to face. And this aligns well with the context of the piece in the Great Depression. And then the rawness and realness depicted within the scene further points to materialism, in that it points out the reality of the situation. It's not some far off idealist, it's material, it's the here and now. And then the harshness of her wrinkles within the mother's face shows just the emotions that are running through her head. So again, the realness. And this kind of brought me to another point that was made. So the next highest term in the Pentad was the agent, so the mother. So the mother being the focal point really did help the other terms. The other terms did rely on the mother as the focal point. However, when looking at Kenneth Burke's idea that idealism is prevalent in a philosophy if the agent is the key term, it doesn't really fit well with the context of the photo being in the Great Depression, and the fact that you really wouldn't be thinking of like an idealistic society or any idea where the mind is greater than what is happening in the moment. That's not really what the picture is depicting. That's not saying that idealist thought wasn't happening during Depression. It definitely was, with the American dream being on everybody's mind and trying to strive to a better tomorrow kind of was the thought behind the Great Depression. But I think that in this photo, that the artist, photographer is not really focusing on the idealistic idea through focusing on the agent, but rather it's the scene of what the mother is facing that shows that it's not really idealism at play here, but materialism. And it shows that the harsh realities of the world, like materialism, are the real factors that are being represented. And this significance can be found in the scene being dominant. This kind of shows a completely different philosophical shift. So if you first initially look at the photo, you would think that the agent is the main focal point since she's at the center. But really, after using the Pentad, you kind of can see that the scene is what really defines the photograph. So then an emphasis needs to be made on the fact that the writer's motive, so Dorothea Lange's motive behind taking this photo, is that the world could be a very harsh place, and the material elements of economic hardships are not to be messed with. And this kind of allows the conclusion that the reason this artifact had such a widespread effect that it did during the Great Depression is because it didn't focus on some mystic or idealistic sense of a situation by saying, like, we can come out of this, we can do better. But it maintained reality in that it just zoomed in on the harshness and difficulties that the American people were facing, without sugarcoating them, which allowed them to actually take in what was happening and work to get out of that situation. So that's kind of my summary of my findings and my summary video. Thank you.